Hey guys, Apotheosis here again. Welcome back to the channel. You may have figured out by now that one of my favorite Elunes in the entire game is an epic support called Kartia. I'm finally sitting down to make an in-depth guide to this Elune because she is such a vital piece to every player's PvE progression. And even if you can't attain the same 6-digit attack power buffs that you're going to see in the footage for this video, it is very important for you to know where she's used, why she is worth focusing, and how to build her correctly, regardless of where you are in your progression. This information used to be a lot more mainstream in our community, but with very few day one players remaining and multiple waves of new players incoming, a lot of players have missed out on just how important she is, or they ended up building her incorrectly. I also want to advise new players that even though your focus early game is way, and you probably won't use Kartia until later game stages where you need her, it is important that you start collecting her early on because she does do so much better the more base stats that she has. So you definitely want to transcend her to +5 as soon as possible to get even better results from that increase in stats that you gain every time you transcend an Elune. Now where should you plan on using her? Long story short, she's used wherever stats on gear are not enough to clear the content that you are attempting. She is a huge help when transitioning past those stage 10 boss battles where CC no longer works. The boss's defensive stats drastically increasing how much damage you need to put out. And you need to deal with actual fight mechanics while surviving that boss's increased damage output. She is especially helpful when attempting stage 12 clears like Trent or Ime for level 80 to 85 light year gear. For you new players, I even highly recommend locking any 5-star copies of her that you may obtain from the Summon Gacha or from Fusion, and using some seeds on her when you have some to spare. She is just hands down one of the most efficient ways to transition through much of the mid game, and the sooner you get her to +5, the faster you can progress. There are a couple other Elunes that you may want to do this for as well, specifically an epic DPS named Baron J, an epic debuffer named Seraphine, and a rare support named Ahanis. We will talk about this a lot more in an upcoming video detailing an efficient progression path for you to follow to transition from stage 10 boss battles to stage 12s. So stay tuned for that as well, as that is next on my agenda for content for you new players. For those of you in the mid to late game already, she is also core to every Alliance boss and World boss team. You simply cannot compete for top scores in this content without her or without building her correctly. She has also even seen a return to Dimensional Rift, with the increase in that content's difficulty with the recent patch 2.5. Now this is all largely because of the attack meta that persists in the current state of Elune and since its inception. Now if you're new to the channel, I know it seems like I'm rambling, but this information is relevant for you to understand how to build and utilize her correctly. Trust my method and you will have a lot less questions later on. If you look at any ability description in the game, you can see the numbers that it uses to calculate how that skill works. For example, Kangrim's S3 will deal magic damage by adding a flat 2,260 damage to 3.78 times his attack power. That multiplier is how he scales his damage. So Kangrim is an example of somebody that scales with attack power. In contrast, Artemiel's S1 is calculated off of his physical defense, not his attack power. So he is an example of an ability that does not scale with attack. You will see though that the majority of abilities in this game do scale using attack power. This is that attack meta. But you should check each ability and passive like this to know for sure when you are doing your own team building. Kartia then enters this attack meta as the highest attack power buffer in the game. And this allows for team comps to attain stats not even obtainable on the best of gear or maxed out dimensional slates. This is what helps you tackle content that you wouldn't be able to do without her. We then push this to the limit by maximizing team building and team synergy. So how does Kartia buff attack power in the first place? First, she will pick a number using her S2. Then she uses that number to buff herself and her allies' attack power when she next uses her S3. So it takes at least 2 turns for her to buff attack power since she has to use 2 abilities. But to understand how to build Kartia, it is important to first understand how she scales. Do not skip this. It will help you immensely later on when you are team building, compared to following a cookie cutter build guide that you came here to find. Knowing how she works will allow you to make subtle changes to your build or your team comp to fit the content that you are currently attempting. So let's look at her scaling in more detail. First, her S2 will roll for a number using our good old friend RNG, a random number generator. Not once, but twice in the same skill. Our focus when using her correctly is to control that RNG to make high rolls both possible and more consistent. The first RNG roll will pick a number between 10% and 65% of her current attack power. The top end of this roll, that 65%, will cap out or stop at Kartia's base attack power. This is where our planning beforehand will make it possible for us to roll a higher cap. Now, this wording, base attack power, is a lot different than ways that other games use it. In Kartia's case, it means her attack power before any enhanced buffs are applied. This counts stats from gear, dimensional slate, zodiac, and even passives that increase allies' attack without granting a buff to do so, like Weiwei's passive 3 or Reina's passive 1, who both increase their allies' attack power by 10%. All these things increase Kartia's base attack power, and in turn, increase her card cap. Now for that second RNG roll built into the same skill, read her passive 2. It will roll for crit, and if it does crit, then her crit power will be applied to multiply that number from the first roll. This results in a much bigger S2 number. Small note here is that crit power increases will cap at 300% in this game. She also heals herself by the end result of her S2, then stores that number as a soul effect called Card to use later to buff her allies when using her S3. This soul effect is retained through death, so if she did die with it and gets resurrected by an ally, she can still buff the same card. Now, that healing piece of her S2 is often the part that most players are missing out on or need to know to improve their Kartia. Since she heals herself using the number rolled by her S2, healing received and increased healing stats both count as an additional multiplier here. The amazing thing about this multiplier is that it does not rely on RNG. It will be applied to all S2 rolls whether it crits or it doesn't. And for fellow theory crafters, this is an additive multiplier. If this multiplier gets removed in the future, I will add a card in the top right corner and explain the change in the video description below. But if there is no card, then you are in luck and you can still increase your S2 rolls using these stats. Both healing received and increased healing are somewhat limited in this game, and not that easy to find, so let's look at where to find them. You can get increased healing from your Zodiac, the Emperor 3 set, the Disciple Ring, and green skill gems. 3 6-star green gems in her S2 is by far my favorite build, which we will talk about more later. Increased healing received can be found in the front line of charge formation, Medjid's S2, and the healing elixir crafted in the workshop by using mats from exploration missions. After rolling her S2 enough, you will notice the same 2 numbers are showing up a lot more frequently than others. These are her 2 card caps. Pay attention to the scrolling battle text and you will see the lower of these 2 frequent rolls is her non-crit cap. It did not crit and it got stuck at her base attack power like we mentioned earlier, multiplied by your increases to healing. The higher of those 2 numbers is when it does crit and the base attack power gets multiplied by the crit power plus the healing increase multipliers. This higher card cap is the card you want to roll for and use before using her S3. You may have noticed a lot more variety in that second higher cap when using her with Karu. This is because Karu gradually increases her allies' crit power, so that crit cap will increase as Kartia's crit power increases. So we mentioned a couple of stats so far, let's talk about their value and priority when it comes to maxing out Kartia's attack buffs. Since all caps are limited by her base attack power, the number 1 place you need to go to increase her card is increasing her base attack power. Besides the sources we already mentioned earlier in the discussion about the S2, this again is why transcending her is so important. This also makes her dimensional slate very strong, even as an epic, because it is a source of attack power that will translate into stats for her and your entire team. The next most important stat to increase your cap is crit power, and those increases to healing we already discussed. And these two stats are on a similar level because of how they're calculated. Both of these have so few buffs in game from other Elunes, so it's important that you take them wherever you can, as long as you aren't sacrificing attack power to get these increases. For example, if you can get more attack power on Kartia by using a level 80 offhand, take that even if it breaks your Emperor 3 set for the increased healing. This is also why the best in slot ring at the moment is a crit power disciple ring, because you can't get attack on a ring. Now for your third stat priority, you want to look at controlling RNG. The two places to look for this would be crit rate and attack power buffs to Kartia. Neither of these will increase your cap, but it saves you stress by controlling those two RNG rolls we discussed earlier in her S2. The more attack power you have from buffs, the higher the minimum roll is, decreasing the range that you roll when you use that S2 since that top roll is capped. If you want an example of this, take a look at Kartia's S2 tooltip when she is buffed with attack power and compare it to when she doesn't have buffs. That range is a lot smaller. The other big difference with crit compared to crit power or healing received is that we have options when it comes to big crit buffs available from other Elunes like Karu, Miho, or some of the lambs. Also, crit stats on current gear or gems do not translate to a lot of crit rate percent, which makes it even more efficient to focus this third and get the majority of your crit from crit buffs. In terms of which support to use for the crit buff, Karu is slightly better because she brings a crit power increase from her passive, in addition to her attack and crit buffs that help control that RNG as we just discussed. Miho does bring a bigger crit buff when scaled with Kartia's attack buffs, but remember your stat priority, crit rate is third, so Karu is generally better here. There is content though where you will want the rest that Miho brings, like Soul Generation or her evasion buff, where Miho might be a better option over Karu. This stat priority is also why I prefer to use green gems in her S2 as I mentioned earlier. The 9% crit that you gain from orange gems does not do much in terms of consistency compared to those big crit buffs from Karu and Miho. And again, since healing done is second in my priority, I take healing increases wherever I can squeeze them in. Lastly, don't forget attack speed is usually always a good secondary stat as well, and it changes in priority here depending on the speed requirements for the content that you are attempting. Now, as I briefly suggested earlier, you usually don't want to slate epics because it is less efficient number-wise when compared to a legendary Elune for the same resource cost. But don't confuse resource cost with efficiency in terms of prioritizing your progression. Kartia is one of the few, maybe the only epic you will want to strongly consider slating as a priority for PvE because of how much she is used and how it translates into making the rest of your team and in turn your account stronger. Luckily, the stat priority makes rolling her slate pretty easy, because you don't have to be too picky when slating her. If you are slating her, definitely check out my guide on Dimensional Slate to save yourself some resources by doing it efficiently. I'll have that linked to a card in the top right over there. For gearing, in terms of this stat priority, when first starting out, you want the Emperor 3 and 6 sets for the increased healing and increased crit, with a priority on the highest level weapons you have access to. Your next goal then is to break your Emperor 6 set for level 80 weapons and use a Disciple Ring with that Emperor 3 set. Then you can break your Emperor 3 set for any gear with higher attack stats than you had on the Emperor 3 set pieces, and work your way to a support 3 set in this manner. Remember, base attack power is higher than healing increases in your stat priority. The support 3 set then also helps her take more turns to roll and buff more cards, so it is a very good set bonus to also enable her kit. To finish out our build discussion, let's review her 2 other skills. When finally AoE buffing attack power with her S3, she will grant 90% of that number from that card draw from her S2. This buff is also increased by skill gems, so you should use 3 yellow skill gems here. 6-star yellow gems are best, and you should get them here as soon as you can. If you have a Kartia exclusive equipment that increases the S3, that rank 7 makes this buff 100% instead of 90. So this exclusive gear is higher priority over a legendary exclusive with 1603 attack power, as long as you have 14,160 base attack power or more. Which most players, if they can get a maxed out legendary exclusive, they can attain 14,000 base attack. The best in slot gear you want to end up with here would be an attack main stat in addition to that S3 increase. But any stat will do if you have that S3 available. If you haven't pulled the S3 exclusive gear but you have an S2 available, and you're able to attain 21,000 base attack or more, you should use that S2 exclusive over an attack power as well. If none of the above, then just follow the stat priority in this slot and use a maxed legendary attack exclusive for that 1603 base attack. Not much min-maxing regarding her S1 to discuss at all, but I do want to mention something strange I have seen a couple of times while watching others play that are not familiar with her kit. I think this is because of the name of her S1 being throw cards. I have seen players hesitate to use her S1 when the S3 is still on cooldown because they have a good card roll and they don't want to throw it away by using the S1, so they turn swap. Even though there is no rush to reduce the cooldown because the buff on their allies is the same exact buff. So let me be clear, her S1 will throw cards at the target to do damage, but it does not get rid of your soul effect. You retain your card roll when using your S1. If you are soul swapping here, do it to reduce the cooldown of the S3 if your buffs were removed or expiring from taking too many turns before Kartia. And for skill gems, use 3 violet gems here for the attack speed gain in between rolling cards. The very last thing that I want to cover before we close this video is a couple of consideration in terms of team building. First is what I like to call the holy trinity of this attack meta. This is Kartia, Ahanis, and Weiwei. If you don't already know, when you need survivability and damage, these 3 are an excellent place to start from and a good way to practice using and maxing Kartia as well. Just choose a crit buffer to bring to help you roll your cards, and there's all kinds of fun to be had when maxing their interactions. You also want to look at using the massive attack buffs to scale damage with team comps by bringing a weakened defense that scales with attack, like Baron J or Seraphine, and a damage dealer that matches that school of damage that you bring from the weakened defense that scales well with attack power, like Kang Rim, Chloe, or Arslan, who all each have massive multipliers built into their kits outside of just their damage scaling we mentioned earlier. The last thing to discuss is Karu versus Medjid versus a normal monster called Chimera. He brings a huge crit power buff on his S2, but I think he's officially out of the meta where we stand, as we don't have any content that he is better in, as he is a one-trick pony. Technically, if you needed to burst your way to a higher crit cap, he would be stronger than Karu. There just isn't any content where that is the case. Most of these fights are very prolonged, and Karu brings almost as much crit power in addition to everything else she does for your team. Bringing them together is mostly overkill because of that crit power capping at 300%. You're better off bringing Medjid in this case if you have room for one more support for that additional multiplier we discussed earlier. In terms of Medjid versus Chimera, even though Medjid's multiplier is lower, it is not reliant on crit. And even in a 100% crit environment like World Boss, it is a closer comparison, but the lack of ability to buff who you want there limits both of their efficiency in the slight, and you're somewhat already limited in terms of room for more supports to even consider either one of them. And that's all I have for this spotlight, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Sorry it took so long to make this content. I do put a lot of work into these things, as I do care a lot about quality over quantity, so I do need to be motivated to make them. and the community definitely needed it, so I was finally compelled to do it. Stay tuned for more videos. I will be making a couple more with all the changes that Elune has seen recently, especially with patch 2.5 and the introduction of auto battle. I want to make a clear progression path for you guys to follow to transition you from that mid game of clearing stage 10s and get you to tackling stage 12s and farming better gear. Also, check me out on Twitch. I've been streaming there a lot more than I am making videos these days, so come say hi, ask me any questions that you have. I'd be happy to help you. Chat is definitely going to help you as well. And big shout out to my Twitch subscribers over there as well. All of you guys are way too generous, and I hope everybody knows how much I appreciate your support. Mahalo nui loa, everybody, and I'll see you guys in the next guide. Bye!